Sam Skinner joins us now. He had served for a time as Chief of Staff to President Bush. And Sam, it's very nice of you to join us today. I'm wondering, as you watch this along with the rest of us, what's going through your mind today?
Well, I am watching it, and I'm also thinking, obviously, as we honor this great person. And I look at Air Force One, and I think of the many trips I took with him on that airplane, and you know how generous he was. One of the stories I remember, everybody knows him as a war hero and as a president and a world leader, but as a person, one day I was aboard Air Force One just hitching a ride down to Florida, and he was going with a group of his friends. And he saw me on the airplane when I was Secretary of Transportation. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm saving the government money." He said, "Well, what do you need when you get down to Florida?" And I said, "I'm all taken care of, Mr. President." Well, he came back twice to make sure I was all right. And then as he got off that ramp that you just saw, he said to me, "Are you sure you don't need anything?" That's the kind of person he was. So that's my memory as I look at Air Force One this morning.
There's so many of those stories. And as Sam points out, he'd served both as a cabinet member for President Bush as Secretary of Transportation, right? And then as his Chief of Staff. There's so many of those stories where we hear, and I think it's somewhat unique when we're talking about a former leader like this, especially a former president, where the other person comes first. And I know over the weekend so many people made, and I think it's right to make a big deal out of this, how the pronoun I was almost foreign to this president. He was uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I use that a lot. I say he always said we, never I. Never talked about I, the first person. He always would talk about what we're doing, what you've done, you and we. Thank you, and what we. So, and I also think as we talk about him, he had so many great people, now, excluding me, of course, but others that worked with him and then followed his role model. He was the role model for the rest of their lives. I mean, watching him give back helped me understand how important it was for me to give back for my entire life. And I think I'm just one of thousands that saw that firsthand. And of course, he had the points of life where he recognized people that really give back. So when you have a role model like this who you work for and know for 38 years, it rubs off. You've got really an obligation to give back. And I think that's what he'll be remembered for, not only as a great president, but a person who gives back and wants others to give back. And that's all he asks in return for what he's given you.
Putting presidents in historical context often takes time, and now some time has passed since the term that President Bush served. His son, in the 60 Minutes interview that aired last night, as well, I believe, as his close friend James Baker, they both said that they believe that this president may be remembered as the best one-term president who ever served. Well, only one term. What would your own reflections of that be?
Well, you know, I think I was adding it up the other day. I've been alive during, I think, 12 presidents, and he's clearly the best in that group when you put the whole thing together. And I don't mean to insult President Bush 43, but he'd be the first to agree. Number one, he obviously, as a first-term president, didn't get a chance to continue all he wanted to do, but what he accomplished in those 4 years is incredible. And he did it. And I would just say is that he was a world leader. You'll see that this week. But I was with him at the UN when we visited in 1992 with 20-some world leaders, either heads of state or heads of government. And I saw how much they revered and respected him in a one-on-one situation up at the United Nations. He'd be remembered. Very few presidents have the opportunity to do that in their lifetime, let alone in 4 years. So I would agree with President Bush, George W. Bush, that he will clearly be the greatest four-year president in our history.
Right. It seemed like you were almost ready to add to it. You were and say better than many of the two-term presidents. And, I mean, obviously you have a bias and you've served alongside.
I think he's right there at the top.
But, yeah.
Well, if you look at it all, what he did. Now, obviously, I'm from Springfield, Illinois, so Lincoln is number one, and I understand that. And there's some really great presidents that we've had over the years who accomplished a great deal, but most of them were two-term presidents. And this is a first-term president that accomplished most, and he's right on that top-tier list. And I think he was very comfortable. Even he didn't like to lose. He was a person that competed all the time. And, you know, as they say in a fire, well, there's a fire, 9 people run out and 1 person runs in, and he's the one that runs into the fire. And I think that is recognized by this American people in the world this week, and it's well deserved.
The live pictures you're looking at from Houston, Texas here, early afternoon Eastern time and late morning Central time, showing the crowd that has gathered at Ellington Field to bid farewell to the former president, called Houston home for so long. And now Air Force One, or Special Air Mission 41, as the Air Force jet has been designated today, has begun to taxi on that runway and will be taking off moments from now. A former chief of staff to President Bush, Sam Skinner, also served as a transportation secretary, has been kind enough to join us here today. You're talking about his legacy, and I know that you've mentioned and many others have mentioned it in terms of what he accomplished in foreign policy, whether it be the Gulf War and so many other, at the end of the Cold War, of course, and so many other accomplishments, not only when he was in office as president, but his time as vice president before that in the CIA, his time in China as the envoy there. He's remembered for that, and rightfully so. What about domestic policy? Sometimes that is looked upon as one of the reasons that President Bush didn't get a second term in office. But then I know people like you who are close to him also look at many of his domestic accomplishments in a more favorable light. What do you most remember there?
Well, I of course remember the Americans for Disability Act. I want every American, when they see a ramp, choking up a little bit here, see a ramp, see a bathroom that's been facilitated. That's because of George Bush.
Yeah, he got that done.
He knew that people with special needs needed special care, and he drove that bill.
Yeah. I can see you're emotional about it, understandably.
Well,
so,
a little bit,
yeah. No, I think the nation feels a loss after a life that was so well lived, but on a personal level, I'm sure you feel it as well. Did you stay close to him after he left office as well?
Oh, I did. I had the opportunity to spend some time with him, and last summer up in Maine. He was always in good spirits. He has a wonderful sense of humor.
Yeah.
Some of his jokes a lot of us don't get, but they're funny to him. He loved to tease. He was self-deprecating. I just think so many stories. He's a man of honor. We played golf, and he lost one time, and he said, how much do I owe you? And I said, Mr. President, you lost $2, but I'm not going to collect. He says, oh, yes, you are. My mother said, never complain and always pay off. Then he turned to an aide and said, he said, do you have $2? I don't know that I ever got paid, but that was him.
That's funny.
He was always thinking, let's do it the right way. Let's do it the honorable way. Let's do it with integrity. Let's care for others. Let's take care of others. The military he loved. I just see the military down there in Texas. And, of course, he loved Texas.
Yep.
He loved Texas and what it meant to him and what they did for him, and Texas loves him. But I think of the military. He loved the military. Of course, he was one of them. But wherever we went, he always talked about the military and their service and the sacrifice. And, of course, his sacrifice. I think because he almost was captured by the Japanese in World War II, and just seconds away, I think he always looked back on that as he was blessed to be alive, and that he had an obligation to take care of the military and take care of our country. And I think that changed his life when the submarine Finback pulled him out of the water.